and the only thing that you can do at that point is get high.
Have you ever heard a jaw-dropping rags to riches story and just wondered loudly to yourself, how did this person do it? Well, that's exactly the story of this typical homeless drug addict who has gone all the way to change his story and transform his life. But what exactly did Khalil begin to do differently, and how exactly was he able to orchestrate such a phenomenal transformation? Well, you don't have to wonder any longer, as in this video we'll be detailing the mind-blowing transformational story of Khalil Rafati and bring you every bit of this joyous journey to success. Khalil's story is one that is bound to fill you up with so much energy and take you places you never thought you could be. You don't want to miss this one, so let's go.
Addicted to heroin and crack.
While the name Khalil Rafati might not ring a bell to some 10 to 15 years back, it surely do so now, especially after his remarkable transformational feat. He is a self-made multi-millionaire who took his fate into his own hands and was relentless in striving for what he knew he could achieve. From living in Skid Row, the worst homelessness district imaginable, Khalil faced his fears and built a resolution so strong and powerful that it propelled him into the successful business owner that he has become. Khalil practically had no hope for a better future, but now owns and runs a successful business that makes tens of millions of dollars. A business that he started drawing inspiration from his dark past. Khalil was born in 1969 in Toledo, a brutal, tough, and profoundly violent neighborhood in Ohio, to immigrant parents neither of whom spoke English nor were ideally equipped and fit to be his parents. He was the son of a Polish-Jewish mother who was raised Roman Catholic and a Muslim father of Palestinian origins. His childhood was marked by sexual abuse and violence that made him always want to get as far as possible away from his home. Khalil didn't have an ideal childhood. By the time Khalil was 10, he'd already been exposed to vices a kid his age shouldn't have known existed. He practically began smoking at age 10, and by the time he was 12, he'd become very used to drinking beer and would constantly get into just any act to get attention. He became a serial vandal and shoplifter in what would soon mark the beginning of repeated run-ins with the law. In 1992, Khalil would fulfill his long-term childhood yearning and gnawing desire to get away from home. With less than $1,000 to his name, he decided to move to LA to become rich and famous. On getting to LA, he got into a rock and roll band, as that seemed a pretty easy option and path to fame. He started doing drugs and was popular and acceptable among many rock and roll bands in LA. This step would, however, be the beginning of his downward spiral and a life of unbridled addiction to drugs. Khalil was 27 at the time, and things were getting really bad for him. He was consistently smoking heroin and was arrogantly absolved in the lifestyle that he absolutely thought was glamorous. He'd take ecstasy every night and was absolutely convinced he wasn't ever going to get out of his addiction. So he practically gave up on himself and didn't care anymore, submitting himself wholly to drugs. In Khalil's own words, the drugs had completely taken my soul from me without my consent, and I went straight to hell. Before long, he became homeless and was now living full-time on the streets and in the roughest homeless den possible in Los Angeles. He'd sleep on sidewalks, from where he'd constantly see people beaten and thrown out of windows, as well as get stabbed and left for dead. He'd become helplessly addicted and was now constantly getting in and out of jail. After his release, he'd soon fall back into the usual cycle and would overdose on drugs a couple of times, only to land in the hospital and have his life saved by paramedics. Eventually, he wound up in jail yet again, this time the Los Angeles County Jail, and would only survive after he was transferred from the facility's general population to its less violent psychiatric unit. Practically everyone he knew had given up on him, and he seriously began to think about recovering and getting himself out of the mess his life had become. After countless failed attempts at sobriety, Khalil cleaned himself up for the last time on June 18, 2003, after getting professional help. In Khalil's own words, "I'd finally reached the bottom of all bottoms. There was no more digging left to do. All my shovels were broken. I was done." Before long, Khalil had grown so serious about his recovery, and for the first time, he felt a resolve so strong that not even his addiction at its strongest came close to. As a first step, he got himself admitted into a 12-step program that organized recovery meetings for people like Khalil who needed help weaning themselves off their addiction to drugs. He would attend sobriety meetings every single day, twice a day. He started fending for himself again and got back to washing cars and cleaning people's apartments for pay. Khalil realized that in order for him to make the desired change to his life and become a new person who's goal-focused, he needed to take everything about his recovery seriously. So he got himself a sponsor and did everything his sponsor wanted him to do. He was made to do cleanups at meetings and prepare cookies and coffees for meetings. It was pretty tough on Khalil, but these commitments that seemed perhaps too silly actually began to mold him into a new person. Soon, he began experimenting with different recipes and flavors, and on one occasion ended up spending well over budget for the meals at their recovery meetings. But the exciting part was everyone at the meeting loved and praised his creative recipes and flavors. It was at this moment that Khalil realized his potential. He realized he had the capacity as well as the love and passion for serving people with the best food that made them light up. This was essentially what transformed his life and led him to set up his largely successful business, Sun Life Organics. Now, after 5 years of actively doing his cookie and coffee commitment, Khalil had saved up enough money from different jobs and invested it. He went on to become a sponsor to a couple of other people himself as well, and set up his own recovery program, which would also birth the idea for his first business. When the idea for this business came, he knew just right away that this was his calling. So he took a bet on himself and went all in with every penny. Although there was no guarantee that he would get any customers or that they were going to love and buy into his idea. He switched addictions from drugs to healing and wellness, and no challenge was too big enough to make him back out. His first business, Riviera Recovery, took off with particular challenges of every maiden business. In Khalil's own words, it was such a nightmare and he pretty much hated it. The challenges were very daunting that he'd often cry himself to sleep at nights, but the business ended up being very successful financially. Soon he sold this business, took all the money he got plus his savings and put everything on the line again to set up his now popular and largely successful second business, Sun Life Organics. In 2011, Khalil joined forces with his business partner Haley Gorsey, and they opened the doors to the first Sun Life Organics in Malibu, California, with a simple mission: to love, heal, and inspire. Beyond providing people with access to true nourishment and a broad array of organic products, Khalil wanted to provide a fun and safe environment where people could come together and reconnect as a community. Sun Life Organics now has 12 branches scattered across California, Texas, and Miami, and there are others opening up soon as well. What did you find fascinating about Khalil Rafati's story? You think he was lucky to have succeeded? Or was his success a deserving outcome of his sheer hard work and determination? We'd love to hear from you. Please leave your answers in the comments section and let us know what your thoughts are about this truly amazing story. Khalil's story is truly an incredible one. In his mid-30s, he was a homeless junkie who was helplessly addicted to drugs. But by his 40s, he'd taken reign of his life again, gotten over his addiction, and was putting everything on the line again to nurture his newly found passion. Khalil was simply no quitter, and he wasn't letting anything get in his way of his goals.